Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah, it's great to be back.
Today we're going to be looking at something kind of interesting, something that we often think of as purely negative,
Hmm.
but the source we're looking at today suggests that it can actually be a catalyst for some pretty positive changes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we'll be talking about grief today
Grief.
and how it can be a force for good.
Interesting.
We're going to be referencing an excerpt called Turning Grief into Purpose, the Transformative Power of Loss. Have you ever heard of that?
I have not.
Yeah, it's a pretty fascinating piece, and it starts off with this idea that, grief isn't something that you just get over.
Right.
You don't just wake up one day and you're all better.
Uh-huh.
It's more like grief becomes something that you learn to carry with you.
You carry
Yeah,
it.
it's almost like an emotional imprint,
Hmm.
you know?
An imprint.
Like it leaves a lasting mark on you.
Okay, so it's not just a feeling, it's like it really changes you.
Exactly, and it can stay with you for a long time.
Wow. Yeah, I can see that. Like you might just be going about your day,
Yeah.
and then suddenly you smell something or you hear a song,
Yeah.
or maybe it's the anniversary of something, and all of a sudden
Yeah.
all these emotions come flooding back.
It all comes back.
It can be really intense.
Yeah, definitely.
But the excerpt emphasizes that this is normal.
Normal.
Totally normal.
Okay.
It's not a sign of weakness or anything.
Gotcha.
It just shows how deeply you loved and how strong that connection was.
I see. That makes sense.
And get this, the excerpt actually argues that grief, while painful, can be a huge source of motivation.
How so?
Well, when we go through a big loss, our world gets turned upside down,
It does.
and suddenly things that used to seem so important maybe don't matter so much anymore.
I can imagine. Yeah.
And we start to question, what really matters in life.
It's like a wake-up call almost.
It really is. And from that wake-up call, a new sense of purpose can emerge.
So instead of just being sad and lost,
Right.
you can actually find a new direction. Exactly. And the excerpt gives this really powerful example.
Oh, what is it?
It talks about the founding of Mothers Against Drunk Driving.
MADD.
Yes, MADD. And it shows how individual grief,
Yeah.
in this case the loss of children to drunk driving accidents, can actually lead to huge changes.
Wow. So from something so tragic,
Yeah.
something good can come out of it.
Absolutely. It's inspiring, right?
Definitely. But how does the excerpt tie grief to resilience?
It's not about ignoring the pain.
Okay.
It's about learning to live with it.
You learn to live with it.
Yeah, the excerpt suggests that going through something so difficult can actually reveal a strength that you didn't even know you had.
So like hidden reserves of strength.
Like you're forced to tap into something deep inside.
Interesting.
And that becomes a source of resilience for the future.
I see. So going through a loss can actually make you stronger.
It can. And the excerpt also points out that people who choose to help others who are going through something similar
Okay.
often find that they have a lot of empathy
Makes sense.
because they've been there themselves.
Uh-huh.
And they can offer a level of understanding that someone who hasn't experienced that kind of loss just can't.
Right.
You know what I mean?
I do. Yeah.
So there's something really beautiful about that.
Yeah, it's like a cycle of healing almost.
Exactly. You help others, and in doing so, you help yourself.
And it reminds us that even though grief can be so isolating, we're not alone in it.
Not at all.
There are other people out there who understand.
Definitely. And so far we've talked about grief as this motivator and this source of resilience.
Right.
But the excerpt also talks about how grief can fuel creativity,
Oh, that's interesting.
isn't it? Throughout history, so many artists, writers, musicians,
Yeah.
they've used their art to express the complex emotions that come with loss.
Yeah, when you think about some of the most moving pieces of art or music,
Exactly.
they often come from a place of deep emotion.
Right. And grief can be one of the most powerful emotions there is.
Yeah, for sure. And the act of creating something, it can be so therapeutic.
It really can. It allows you to express things that words just can't capture.
Like you're finding a way to get those feelings out.
Exactly.
Meh.
Have you ever turned to something creative during a tough time?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people find comfort in expressing themselves creatively,
Yeah, it can be a really healthy way to process things.
and it can be really powerful too.
It can. So we've seen how grief can lead to personal growth, resilience, and even creative expression.
It's amazing how much it can impact us.
But the excerpt goes even further. It suggests that grief can be a catalyst for change on a much larger scale.
You mean like societal change?
Exactly like we talked about with MADD.
Right.
That's just one example, but there are so many cases where personal loss has sparked these huge movements.
It's like grief goes from this really personal thing See
Right.
something shared.
Yeah. And it connects people and motivates them to take action.
It's like finding common ground in pain
And then using that shared experience to try to make things better.
to prevent others from going through the same thing.
Yeah, it's incredible, really.
It is, the excerpt talks about how this often happens after tragedies.
Like what kinds of tragedies?
Well, it mentions parents who have lost children to gun violence
Oh, wow.
and how they might come together to advocate for stricter gun control.
That must be so difficult, but also so powerful.
It is, and it also talks about families affected by certain diseases
Right.
and how they might raise awareness and funding for research.
So it's about turning that pain into something positive.
Exactly, and it really highlights the power of human connection.
Yeah, even when we're facing so much sorrow,
Mm-hmm.
we can find strength and unity.
And we can make a difference.
We really can. And it's important to remember that the journey from loss to purpose,
Right.
it's not always easy or
It's
straightforward.
a process.
It is. And the excerpt emphasizes that it's a process that takes time.
It does.
And there will be ups and downs.
Then it's okay to not be okay sometimes.
Exactly. It's essential to be patient with yourself and to seek support when you need it,
Support is so important.
whether it's from loved ones, support groups, or mental health professionals.
Absolutely, because you don't have to go through this alone.
And the excerpt really stresses the role of mental health professionals
Yeah, they can be so helpful.
in helping people navigate grief and find healthy ways to cope.
It's about having that safe space to process everything.
Exactly. And to develop strategies for moving forward.
And to remember that it's not about denying or suppressing grief.
Right.
It's about understanding it, integrating it into your life.
And maybe even harnessing its power for growth and change.
That's a powerful thought.
It is. It really speaks to the resilience of the human spirit.
Even in the face of immense loss.
We can find meaning, purpose, connection.
It's pretty amazing.
It really is. And it's important to remember that everyone's experience with grief is unique.
No two journeys are the same.
And there's no set timeline for healing or finding purpose.
Just take it one day at a time.
Be kind to yourself. Allow yourself to feel and reach out for support when you need it.
And remember, there's always hope, even amidst loss.
Absolutely. There's resilience and the potential for something beautiful to emerge.
That's a great message to end on.
It is.
You know, it's interesting. We've been talking about grief and its impact on an individual level,
Uh-huh.
but the excerpt also explores how grief can have a much broader impact.
Like a ripple effect.
Exactly. It suggests that grief can actually be a driving force for positive change in communities and even in society as a whole.
That's pretty powerful.
It is, and what's fascinating is that this often starts with a very personal experience of loss.
So it's like individual grief can spark a larger movement.
Exactly. The excerpt gives the example of parents who have lost children to gun violence
Oh, wow.
and how they might channel their grief into advocating for stricter gun control laws.
So they're taking something so intensely personal and trying to make a difference on a larger scale.
Right, and it's not just limited to legislative change.
What else?
Well, the excerpt also talks about families who have lost loved ones to a specific disease and how they might dedicate themselves to raising awareness and funding for research.
It's amazing. It's like they're trying to prevent others from experiencing the same loss.
Exactly, and it really speaks to the power of shared experience.
Yeah, while grief can feel incredibly isolating.
It can also create these really strong bonds between people who have gone through similar things.
It's like finding a community of people who truly understand what you're going through.
Yeah, they've walked a similar path, and they can offer a level of empathy that others might not be able to.
So it's not just about receiving support, it's also about giving it back.
Exactly. The excerpt actually suggests that helping others who are grieving can be a form of healing in itself.
That makes sense. You're focusing on something outside of your own pain.
Right, and there's actually a growing body of research that supports this idea.
Really?
Yeah, studies have shown that acts of altruism, kindness, generosity,
Okay.
they can have a positive impact on our mental and emotional well-being.
So it's not just a feel-good notion, there's actual science behind it.
Exactly, and this is especially relevant when we're talking about grief.
How so?
Well, by shifting our focus to the needs of others, we can gain a new perspective on our own pain and potentially find a sense of purpose in trying to ease the suffering of others.
It's almost counterintuitive. You'd think focusing inward on your own grief would be the priority.
You would, but the excerpt suggests that extending compassion outwards can actually be a really powerful way to process those emotions.
So it's not about ignoring your own grief.
No, Not at all. It's about finding a balance.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that even in the midst of our own pain, we have the capacity to make a positive impact on the lives of others.
And that can be incredibly empowering.
The excerpt also emphasizes that the journey from loss to purpose isn't always a straight line.
There will be setbacks.
Definitely, there will be days when grief feels all-consuming.
And it's okay to have those days.
Absolutely. It's important to be patient with ourselves and to allow ourselves the space to grieve without judgment.
So it's not a sign of weakness to feel overwhelmed by grief.
Not at all, and it's also not a sign of strength to suppress it.
It's about finding healthy ways to cope.
Exactly, whether it's talking to loved ones, seeking professional guidance, expressing ourselves creatively, or engaging in activities that bring us comfort.
The excerpt also reminds us that seeking support is so important.
It is talking to a therapist, joining a support group, even confiding in trusted friends and family. These can all provide a safe space to explore those feelings and develop coping mechanisms.
And it's a reminder that we don't have to go through this alone.
Exactly. There are people who understand, who've walked a similar path, and who can offer compassion and guidance.
And this brings us back to that core idea that grief, while incredibly painful,
Can also be a catalyst for profound growth and change.
it's a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there's potential for transformation, resilience, and the discovery of a strength we might not have known we possessed.
And that this transformation can take many forms, from personal growth and creative expression
To connecting with others and even sparking social change.
The excerpt encourages us to view grief not as something to be feared or avoided, but as a natural part of the human experience.
Something that, while challenging, can ultimately lead to greater understanding, empathy, and purpose.
It's about embracing the full spectrum of emotions that come with grief.
And recognizing its potential to shape us into stronger, more compassionate individuals.
And that's a powerful message.
It really is. Now, we'd love to hear from you, our listener. What part of this conversation has resonated most with you so far?
What new insights have you gained about the nature of grief and its potential impact on your own life?
Take a moment to reflect on these questions, and we'll be back shortly to wrap up our deep dive into the transformative power of grief. So we've covered a lot of ground today, haven't we?
We have. It's been a really fascinating discussion.
But as we wrap things up, I think it's important to remember something that the excerpt really emphasizes,
What's that?
that everyone's journey with grief is unique.
Oh, absolutely. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to this.
Exactly. And the excerpt actually cautions against the idea of trying to get over grief.
It's not something you just get over, is it?
No, it suggests that it's more about learning to carry it with you.
To integrate it into your life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in a way that allows you to move forward, but still honor the loss.
Like finding a way to hold both the pain and the love, the sorrow and the memories.
That's a beautiful way to put it, and it's a delicate balance, isn't it?
It is. There will be days when grief feels all-consuming.
And other days when it fades a bit.
And that's okay. It's normal.
Totally normal. The excerpt encourages us to be patient with ourselves.
To allow ourselves to feel the full range of emotions.
Without judgment,
Without judgment, exactly. It's not weak to feel overwhelmed by grief.
And it's not strong to suppress it either.
The key is to find healthy ways to process those emotions.
Like talking to loved ones or seeking professional guidance.
Or expressing yourself creatively.
Or doing things that bring you comfort.
The excerpt also reminds us that seeking support is so important.
It really is. Whether it's talking to a therapist, joining a support group, or confiding in trusted friends and family.
Those connections can make such a difference.
It's about creating a safe space to explore those feelings and develop coping mechanisms.
And remembering that you don't have to go through this alone.
Absolutely. There are people who understand what you're going through.
People who've walked a similar path and can offer compassion and guidance.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the most important takeaway is this.
What's that?
Grief is a challenging experience. There's no doubt about that.
It is.
But it doesn't have to define you.
You can find a way through it.
You can. And it can actually be a catalyst for some pretty amazing things.
Like what?
Well, we talked about personal growth and connection,
Right.
and even a renewed sense of purpose.
It's pretty incredible when you think about it.
It is. It really speaks to the resilience of the human spirit.
Our ability to find meaning and strength even in the face of profound loss.
So as we leave you today, we want you to consider this.
How might understanding the transformative power of grief help you navigate your own journey?
Or how might it help you support someone else who's grieving?
Remember to be kind to yourself. Allow yourself to feel and seek support when you need it.
And never underestimate the power of human connection. empathy, and the potential for healing and growth, even in the midst of loss.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
We'll see you next time.